Hello everyone, my name is Samantha Harris and I'm a senior here at St. Leonard University. I'm majoring in religion and minoring in philosophy. I absolutely love being a religion major here. The community is so strong and welcoming, and I've grown so much from my studies these past few years. I'm absolutely honored to share a little bit of what I've learned with you guys here today. Today we're going to be discussing 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 to 7, which read, "Love is patient, love is kind, it is not jealous. Love is not rude, it does not seek its own interests, it is not quick-tempered, it does not brood over injury, it does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things." I know many of you have probably heard that verse 1,000 times and are wondering what's so special about it. But today we're going to be examining it more in depth through the scope of both the time period it was written compared to our modern era. To begin, it is best to understand the context of the passage. This book of the Bible was written in the form of a letter from the Apostle Paul to the city of Corinth, and it was written around 50 AD. Scholars have determined that this is the approximate time that it was written through studying historical figures such as Gallio and comparing them to Paul's known travels. The city in Corinth can be described as cosmopolitan, meaning that the population was very diverse. Paul then would have had to face many differing viewpoints in his letter, and he greatly warned the church in Corinth to guard against secular influences. In this letter, he informs the community of what actions are morally right and wrong, informing them in light of the world that they live in, which is filled with idolatry, incest, and other misdeeds. Although he is directing them and at times sternly addressing the unholy acts of the city, this letter is written with a great tone of affection to this church in Corinth. One scholar by the name of Raymond Brown says, Paul's known contact with Corinth lasted nearly a decade, and there is more Pauline correspondence to that city than any other place. Therefore, although the messages throughout this letter may seem stern, Paul's tone remains an affectionate guidance to his beloved church. Another key aspect of this chapter and this letter in particular is that it was not written in English, but it was written in Greek. The Greek language has lots of different words to describe our one word, love. For example, they have eros, which means a romantic and sexual love. They have philia, which is a deep friendship, storge, which is a familial love, and agape, which is a self-sacrificial love. 1 Corinthians 13 is commonly known as Paul's hymn of love, and in this chapter, Paul uses the term agape, which is the selfless sacrificial kind. So looking back at this verse, we can read it in a different light. We can read it as agape is patient, agape is kind, agape is not jealous, and so forth. Raymond Brown mentions that agape starts with God, who needs nothing from creatures, but by love brings them into being and ennobles them. Paul's notion of love is based in the self-giving of Christ. Therefore, God, in his perfection of agape, selflessly giving and creating for our own goodness, not for his own. And likewise, this agape is manifested in the life of Christ, who literally sacrificed himself for mankind. Paul uses his knowledge of Christ as a perfect example of self-sacrificial love and then calls the church in Corinth to act likewise. But many ask, what exactly does this agape look like? Paul lays it out by expressing the virtues. Another scholar, Stephen Cox, says, Paul frequently encouraged patience to others, even if wrongly treated. This teaching emanates from the Sermon on the Mount. This means that patience is not just dealing with your family and friends and acquaintances, but extends to all people. And this is deeply rooted in the Sermon on the Mount, which was spoken by Jesus himself. The next virtue mentioned by Paul is kindness, which Fitzmyer explains as a generous welcome that one accords another. Again, expressing kindness is not limited to just those you know personally, but as one accords another, it means in everyone that you pass by. The next part of this chapter, we see it's a group of virtues. They're not presented as plainly, but as negations. Love does not envy, love does not boast, and so forth. Some would consider this a literary style used to stress the importance of the words being used and the message that they hold. Therefore, in their negations, Paul is addressing their opposites. Cox then goes on to say, love is not proud, rather it is humble. A person who brags exhibits excessive pride in self and is deficient of the love of God and others. This means that in simply stating that love is not inflated, Paul is also addressing the moral sin of pride and is advocating for humility, which enhances right relationship with others and is thus pleasing to God. This is seen also in his other negation that love does not rejoice with wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Cox again says that love is always wise and discerning. Love and truth are inseparable partners that reside in God himself. St. Thomas Aquinas builds upon this further in this union of truth and love and says, unless the mind of a man is nourished on truth, his heart is shrunken and starved. Hence, Paul's mention of the relationship between love and truth is so clearly stated in just a few short words. The last section ends just as it began, with positive notions. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. In this, Paul could be mentioning the persecution that these Christians are facing in their faith. By making known that love is to be lived in bearing, believing, hoping, and enduring, he is encouraging the church in Corinth to stand firm in their mission of love, despite the possibility of retaliation by others. Paul ends this section with a powerful transition. Love never fails. Looking at love itself, encompassing all the characteristics as a virtue, Collins and Harrington in their research in the Sophrogena commentary elaborates on Paul's message of love itself by saying, neither a human virtue, nor is it simply one of the charisms. It is the charism par excellence, the very power of God at work. Therefore, love, being one of the theological virtues, is the greatest of virtues, since in expressing love for one another, we are acting in accord with the Creator. Paul asserts within his hymn that these virtues need tending to as we strive to be patient, kind, humble, and all the things that agape is said to be. Through our exercising of this gift, we are not only pleasing and serving our neighbors, but we are also pleasing God by using and providing his greatest gift to others. What follows from all this, though, is the question of how does this apply to me today? If we look in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it defines love as charity is the theological virtue by which we love God above all things for his own sake, and our neighbor as ourselves for the love of God. Therefore, this definition is rooted when Jesus calls the greatest commandment. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Matthew 22:36-39. Therefore, although these things were spoken thousands of years ago, and Paul wrote this letter more than 50 years after Jesus' death, we can still have them applied to today as well. The thing about love being the highest of the virtues and the greatest of the gift is that it's so simple and it's so attainable. Although at times it can seem difficult, the simplicity comes in the random acts of kindness that we're called to do each day. Simply sharing a little kindness with a smile, being patient in traffic, not being jealous when somebody has something that you desire. These are the first steps to a greater influence of love in our own lives. We also see this agape love mentioned specifically by Pope Benedict XVI in his letter on Christian love, Des Caritas Est, and he mentions, love now becomes concern and care for one another. No longer is it self-seeking, a sinking in the intoxication of happiness. Instead, it seeks the good of the beloved. It becomes renunciation and is ready, even willing for sacrifice. Thomas Aquinas is famous for a quote in saying, love is to will the good of another. Therefore, to live a life full of love, full of this agape, we are to live a greater life that is full of selfless love, giving ourselves to both the Lord and our neighbors. Aquinas in his Summa also goes later to say, we do most for others when we think least of ourselves and most of God and our fellows. The Catholic Church builds upon this wisdom and the ideas of Catholic social teaching when it talks about the principle of solidarity in terms of friendship or social charity and complete Christian brotherhood, when we seek authentic fellowship with one another. Love does not seek its own interest. Rather, there is a focus on community, on fellowship, on justice. In Pope Benedict's letter, he later goes on to say, love is therefore the service that the church carries out. Therefore, in our love, in practicing patience, kindness, everything in the self-giving love, we are called to love not only our friends and family, but our entire world in a fellowship agape. The self-sacrificial love portrayed by Christ himself, built on by Paul, and instilled in modern Catholic values, is to be lived out as plainly as St. Aquinas puts it. To love is to will the good of another and to treat other as self. Even now, the words of St. Paul in his first letter to the Corinthians impacts our lives. Through our recognition of his authority, Paul's words are used in the activities of the church, guiding us not only through scholarly studies such as this, but in our prayer life and our daily activities as well. Likewise, we can learn from this wisdom and allow it to shape how we love and how we act. We can stop and ask ourselves, do I love like this? An agape love for both the Lord and our neighbors? The examples and characteristics listed by Paul in 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7, can better help us form our conscience and our lives built on the love that we seek to be patient, kind, humble, truthful, and enduring. Even the teachings of the church help form us as a community in our agape love to one another, to actively seek goodness for each other. Therefore, through our examination of 1 Corinthians, we are not only studying and analyzing a historical text written by Paul over 2,000 years ago and seeking how it evolved over time, but we are actively looking into how we too can live a life of love that was addressed by Paul and gifted to us by God through his Son. Let us then, going forward, keep in mind the greatest commandment and the greatest virtue, an agape love. I want to thank you everyone for your time here today. If you would like to know anything more about this topic or others, I highly recommend reaching out to Dr. Woodard, and I'd like to give him a nice big shout out and thank you for this opportunity to be here today. My department makes me who I am. They have helped me grow not just in my academic career, but in my spiritual growth as well. And I'm so blessed to have the opportunity to be here at St. Leo. So if you have any further questions, please reach out to my department. And I'd like to thank St. Leo University as well for this wonderful opportunity to be out here and speak. God bless y'all.